welcome back to another episode of Chop Chop. And this is Chopper, and I have my much esteemed colleague, Lane Jaffe, the chief, with me today. He's on the chopping block. This man, if you want to talk about life lessons and lacrosse, he's got them both. So, Chief, first off, welcome to the show.
Chop, awesome to be back, reunited, my man.
Awesome. Hey, a lot of people may know you in Southern California as a coach, but they may not know what an outstanding past you had as an athlete starting in high school. I guess you were football, wrestling, and lacrosse. And do I have this right? You were all-state in all three of those. Is that correct?
It's from a small town, yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter how big a pond. If you're that big of a fish, it'd be tough to land you for sure. So you went on, you played a goalie for Rutgers Lacrosse, and you were an All-American goalie there. Is that, if I have that correct, or was that high school?
In high school, it's All-American.
Okay. And then, so you go to Rutgers, you play goalie, and one of the things that a lot of players that view the show are interested in is, what's that transition like from high school to college? So why don't you tell us how yours went?
It's a great question, because everybody at that level, there's 50 plus Division I teams. So everybody at that level's All-American or close to. So you get to a school after them telling you you're going to be the man. And as a goalie, there's 5 other goalies, 3 of them, if not 4 of them, All-Americans. So from being a huge fish in a small pond to just being another fish in the ocean, it's comparable. So what you came from to what you're going to, if you don't have the work ethic and the mental state of knowing that you're going to be beaten down a little bit, it's a challenge. It's obviously an awesome challenge to step up to, but it's a very big challenge going from high school to Division I. It's a whole new ballgame.
Sure. So I can actually share the similar experience. I was a big shot basketball player. This is back in the days of covered wagons and that kind of thing, but coming out of St. Louis and signed to go with Kansas University, which is, an elite program. And so I went from being the man to being just another guy, and ended up spending about 2 weeks in the front office. I was injured. And so instead of going to practice, they put me to work in the front office. And I was in charge of addressing and mailing the recruitment letters that they were sending out. And Chief, I could not believe how many letters they were sending out. And I'm thinking to myself, I was just one of those letters. I was just one of 1,000. And so it is a big jump. And the other thing I think that you just mentioned that I would echo is that for anybody that's making that leap, it's not how good you are when you get there. It's how good you become while you're there. And I will admit, I was intimidated by all these upperclassmen and how good they were. What it was hard for me to realize was they were just like me when they got there. They just improved. And I'm sure you probably have a similar experience.
That's it. That's absolutely. We always think that these other people just came out of the womb fully gold, whereas, they worked their way up there. They're just like you. So just in life, we have this fraud syndrome. You think you're doing something, but somebody's better at it or more experienced, which they may be. But at the same time, you have equal opportunity if you put in the work to be as successful as them. They're no different than you are.
Yeah. And, the flip side of that, I was able to, kind of go through college again with Zach, my younger son, when he went off to Providence to play lacrosse. And I went out there and watched a 2-day camp they had there the summer before he left for lacrosse, for Providence. I couldn't believe how good those players were. And I'm thinking to myself, man, maybe this isn't the right spot. Well, he worked his butt off. I mean, he really did. And he got better and better and better and, rose to the top of that heap. So it is all about what you do when you get there rather than how good you are when you arrive. So
right. And a lot of kids haven't played at that level of competition with that level of competition. So, the good guys make the good guys better. So that competition, if you're ready to assume that challenge, you'll get.
You bet. And it's also important to remember the evolution of lacrosse in Southern California. He graduated high school in 2010. And back then, there were very few kids good enough in Southern California to go play D1. Why? Because the competition wasn't that good. They weren't playing against those guys every year. Nowadays, you see 10, 15, 20 guys leaving, and these college coaches are all over the Southern California high school scene, because the game has elevated and so has the competition. Absolutely. And you were a big part of that, my man. I'd like to, people out in Southern California know about you coaching. Other listeners may not, but you came out to Southern California when lacrosse was brand new. Why don't you tell us when that was and sort of what you were up against back then?
I started in 2002. So after graduating college in 98, took some years off. Lacrosse was a job in itself, so I was looking to, continue to develop myself outside of it. Came back to the game in '02, coached at UCLA with Mike Allen, who played on that Princeton team that won 4 national championships. So super knowledgeable, super humble guy. So I got to learn what it meant to be a coach. So that was my first stint in coaching. I went on to be the head coach there, was coach of the year at UCLA, and then wanted to get into high school lacrosse because I wanted to help develop, what was undeveloped. There were people out here before me, Scott Hockstead and Jeff Siebold and Gary Greenbaum. There's like the godfathers of it. But I was the next generation when lacrosse first became CIF sport. And I was at Palos Verdes at that time.
Okay, and so you got to Palos Verdes when? When did you start coaching there?
2006. So it was the first year they became recognized by the CIF as a CIF sport.
Okay, and I'm drawing a blank, but your star player that year, you remember that name?
Spangler.
Yeah, say it again.
John Spangler.
Yeah, so Spangler was the man, and here we were in PV. Lacrosse was new. Zach was just getting interested in it. Went and saw Spangler play, and the guy was a magician. And that year, I'm not sure if they even had any kind of a playoff, did they? Because
went down to the Home Depot and played Foothill, Home Depot Center. Played Foothill, lost by 1 in an incredible game, and the Riptide were in attendance because they had the game before. It was great for the introduction of CIF lacrosse.
Okay, and so I was going down to watch games back then, but I want to tell you that for a sport that didn't have a lot of following, there were at least 1,000 people there, I believe, which was amazing. And if memory serves, you guys jumped out maybe 2 or 3 goal lead through the first half.
Yep, remember well.
And so here's all I knew. I knew that Lane Jaffe was the man. I didn't have a kid playing for you, and I knew that PV program was top rate. And so I'm thinking, oh yeah, Palos Verdes is going to roll. Little did I know that John Fox was doing the same darn thing at Foothill that you were doing at PV, and you guys ended up clashing a couple times in those playoffs over the next couple of years, right?
Absolutely, another legend of the game, John Fox, and he's always had my number. I don't know if we've transitioned yet, but last year was the year that, in tournaments, we beat his tournament team. Like I was finally going to get my revenge, and then, life does its thing. So
sure. And we'll move on, but let's stick at Palos Verdes for just a second, because I did have a chance to watch firsthand a very good class come through, that class of 2010 that you had at PV. And, the thinking was that they were going to roll, but I think they may have gone deeper in the playoffs in 2009 than they did in 10. I think they got taken out by Miracosta, a very good Miracosta team with a number of really good players. And so, but it was in 2010, I think, that you then retired from coaching Palos Verdes. That was your last year there?
Yeah, I decided that I started to get some deep roots in LA, and I wanted to explore further than LA. Like I came out to LA first because my brother was here, but I didn't think it was my landing spot. So I went up to Santa Barbara, coached up at UCSB for a year, and then went to Dominican and Northern California for a year, and then realized I had it pretty good down in Palos Verdes. So I came back to Peninsula High School where there was an opening and coached them for a bunch.
So, if you love someone, set them free, and if they love you, they'll come back. And I guess you did, right?
There it is.
And so when you came back to the Southern California high school scene, I can't remember, was it PV first and then Peninsula, or have I had that backwards?
That's back. So I was at Peninsula, and our biggest win in my life was Peninsula versus Palos Verdes. I mean, that team, the Palos Verdes team, went on to win it all. They're loaded. Jimmy Burrell, a good friend of mine. And it was one of those things where, they had 12 to 15 guys that were awesome. I had 4 or 5 guys that were of level. And it was still almost in the back of the day where if you had 5, 6 guys, you could compete. Now I don't know if it's like that anymore.
It is so true. And, it's funny. Back in the 70s when I was playing college ball, it was even like that then. You would play a team and you would prep for 2 or 3 guys that could really the Right. Now, the 10th guy on the bench can really score if he can get in. And man, I've seen it in high school lacrosse in Southern California where, if you had 1 or 2 good players, you dominated. Now you need 10 for sure, maybe more.
The last team I coached at Palos Verdes, my second strings would have won LA. I mean, we had so much talent there.
Yeah. So. All right. So I talking about Jimmy Burrell and talking about Palos Verdes, we had, Zach on the show a few weeks ago, and he got to talking about the coaches that really made a difference for him. And he mentioned you and he mentioned Jimmy, 2 guys that he played for at PV. And he despite the common success that you guys shared, very different approaches. He said Jimmy he runs red hot, and then he would pull things out of you that you didn't know you had. He mentioned you as being a real calming influence, which he said was much more like his personality. Why don't you talk a little bit about your approach to coaching and lacrosse, and maybe that'll take us into sort of life approaches as well.
Sure. I think the most important part, and the maybe only similarity Burrell and I have, who's a good friend of mine, is we both care. And so if you care about the kids, you'll be successful because you'll give them all you have. Now, our coaching styles were different. That's great. That's what makes each individual, right? So he's a fiery guy, not pure emotion, but very fiery guy, isn't scared to tell how it is. And I just came at it from a different way, trying to calm it. People thinking that they could bring their own excitement. They're young kids. They would have their own energy or match my energy. But, I was there to kind of just tell them that every single time was okay and that mistakes were part of the growth process. And, just trying to keep it fun, realizing like the point of this was to enjoy the time out there. And if I was screaming at them, I don't think they were having fun because I wasn't having fun screaming at them. So that was just my personality. And Burrell is just, he's fiery. It's awesome. It's how he gets the best out of each kid. And he's been super successful. So, different ways to skin a cat, for lack of better term.
Right. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but, we did have Gary Greenbaum, who is he was in his 70s, has been an official out here for high school lacrosse for many, many years, and got him to talking about a couple things. And he was saying that when he first got here, not only the fans, but many of the coaches really didn't know the game. And he made a point at halftime of games that he would go over to the stands and talk to the fans and explain to them some of the calls that maybe he'd made that they were objecting to. I remember something similar with you, and I want to put this in the right context. This is not a criticism of the officiating today or back in 2008. But it was true that back in 2008, the game was so new in Southern California, many of the officials didn't know it all that well. And I remember talking to you offline, and you would say that when you would object to a call, you would try to walk over and just talk to the official, because sometimes it was simply a matter that they hadn't experienced that call or didn't really know the game. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of a challenge that was and how you handled it?
It's frustrating because one of the cool things about sport in general, the way I come about it, is it's confined boundaries, defined boundaries. This is the purpose of it. Put the ball in the goal. As life, there's so many different variables, but sport had these constraints that these are them, them, operate the best in them, and you can be successful. So to have those boundaries kind of changed or not known was super frustrating. But at the same time, you have humans, and they're out there doing the best they can, just like I'm coaching and the players are playing and they drop the ball and I make a bad call, or I say something that's, don't attack a zone correctly, whatever it may be. So I try to always, people are going to forget what you say, people are going to forget what you do, but they're not going to forget how you make them feel. I think that's a Maya Angelou quote. So I always just try to make them feel comfortable, and not, it's not about being right or wrong, but I wanted them to know that I did know, and maybe we can get better without making a huge scene.
Well, I can remember watching you stroll over to an official, and I do mean stroll, very laid back, non-confrontational, and have a brief discussion. Now, there was a funny one I remember, and this is years later, when most of the officials, if they made a mistake, it was simply because they made a mistake and not because they didn't know the game. But you were coaching, I think you were coaching Peninsula in that box league over in Crenshaw, on that Wilson Park. Yep. And it was, it was summer ball, and so it wasn't all that serious. But I think you guys were maybe in the playoffs, maybe the semifinals, and somehow you ended up. I think it was your team that ended up down 3. Maybe, do I have this right? And I think the last call against you, you kind of looked over at your guys and you're like, he must have made that call up, because I've never heard that one before. Does that? Am I getting most of that right?
It rings a bell, and it was just, again, learning how to deal with adversity, because you don't know where it's going to come from, and it's your job just to deal with it. A ref's never just going to change his call, nor should he, per se. You learn to live with it, but it still gets you frustrated and amped up. But how you deal with adversity, right, is going to determine what the future lies. So
you bet. So having really founded the program at PV back in the 08, 06, way back then, you left. When you came back, they were on a roll, largely from what you'd created. Jimmy had pushed the ball forward. A number of people had. But you'd mentioned to me offline that the circumstances surrounding your decision to leave there and go on elsewhere. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, and that'll lead into sort of, the Lane Jaffe lifestyle and all of that. But why did you leave? What were the circumstances?
I felt stagnant in lacrosse itself, coaching at Peninsula at the end. I'm like, I need a change. I've been doing it for 21 years plus, my whole life, but 4 years off since age 8. So I started to feel stagnant. Anytime you feel stagnant, you don't feel in flow. And now my life is trying to be like in flow. And so I needed a new challenge. The Palos Verdes job came up and I saw it as a new challenge. So I jumped at it. And when I got there, it was the best family, the best support system, the best players, and it was epic. It was such a cool thing to be part of. But then, like life, everything goes in cycles, night and day, fall, spring, winter, it's the cycles of life. And I felt that I reached the end of my cycle in lacrosse. The peak was we were going to win a championship, no doubt in my mind. Not that that's the end all be all, but that's where I was at. And I was like, you know what? I need to be more than just a lacrosse coach, not just a lacrosse coach, but that's how I define myself. And I didn't want to look back in 5 years from now and be in the same place I was. I felt I wasn't evolving. And being able to step away from the game for a year, I watch 4 games a week now. I love the sport. I have perspective. I no longer see it as just a lacrosse coach. I see it as somebody who's influencing kids and families and the whole community. So I needed that break away from it to regain perspective of what it was that drew me to it in the first place.
Okay, and so somewhere along, in between stints there, you joined LaxRatz, and you were a big part of our shows for many, many years. And I remember kidding you back then because, we would end one season and you would look like now. And the next year you'd come back and you'd have the beard like, ZZ Top, like you were the lead guitarist for ZZ Top. Right. And in between, you would have been, you'd gone to, I don't know, you tell us a little bit about your world travel, some of the cool places you've been, and maybe some of the sense that you were able to make out of those trips.
Right. So I've been practicing yoga for about 20 years. I've been teaching it for about 10 years. One of the coolest things is teaching the kids. And once the kids gravitate towards it, it's pretty fulfilling because yoga is all about taking care of yourself, connecting to those around you, how you handle the adversity, just dealing with anxiety, depression, being a human. So being able to take what I've learned with the kids has been a positive experience. My travels though, so I went searching thinking it's not within you. Oh, I got to go. I went to Bali, spent time with medicine men there. And then like, this isn't enough. I got to go to Lombok. So I went to an island off of Bali. So I was always looking for extreme things. And I think that kind of relates to me being a goalie. They're like, who wants to do it? Lane will do it. Sure, I'll do it. Give it a whirl. So I went to Bali, met with some medicine men there, went to Peru, sat with some shaman there, went to India, sat with some gurus there. That's really, those are the exotic places that I went. And that was all in the last 3 or 4 years. Just to kind of deepen my practice and see what this spiritual world or stuff really entails. And real quick, I'll just say what spirituality means to me is that it means connection. So if you're a lacrosse coach, it's very spiritual. If you're connected, it's a spiritual experience. You're a knitter, you're knitting a hat, it's spiritual. So it doesn't matter what that activity is. It matters the connection you have to that activity. So anyone can be spiritual as long as you're present with it.
So you're teaching, you're a yoga teacher. You mentioned breathwork teacher. Is that part of the yoga? Or is that different?
Yeah, that's kind of the next evolution of it. Breathwork. So your breath is with you your whole life, right? From birth till transcendence. So you'll notice that when you get tense or anxious, your heart rate speeds up and your breath gets shallow. So I learned how to, get my heart rate down and also deepen my breath. And then it led to just, me feeling open. And so I studied breath work, which again is just another healing modality. And I've helped a lot of people deal with anxiety and depression and trauma and PTSD, all this stuff from actually moving energy. So it's believed that our body is energy, and energy, when it stagnates, that's when it's stuck, we get blocked. When we're able to breathe freely or move or exercise, that's what exercise is moving energy, moving blood, moving oxygen. So yeah, this breath work just opens up your all your nadis, all your shashanas, all your energy lines in your body.
Okay, so we could probably spend days talking about this, which we don't have time for, but Chief, is there, if so, people listen to this, some of them are probably going to wish they could pick up the phone and call you. Do you have any sort of a current address where people were seeking either your yoga or the breath work? Is there any way to get a hold of you right now?
Right. At the moment, just, I mean, I'm pretty visible online, Lane Jaffe. I don't have a business. I was working at a place called Sanctum, which was the only breathwork studio in the nation. It was in Venice. And then once COVID happened, I started doing it online. And then I've kind of peeled back because just I want to be there in person, and that's about to happen pretty soon. So just lanejaffe.com. There's a book called Breathe by James Nestor, which is a great starting point. And it's going to blow your mind. Like, you're going to be like, how come I didn't learn? How come kids don't learn how to breathe? Like, if you're a mouth breather, it's going to greatly affect your health. You know, if you're snoring at night, that's going to affect your health. So learning how to breathe, or relearning how to breathe, is one of the most important things that I've done for my physical, mental, spiritual health.
So the only experience I have firsthand of learning how to breathe was when my wife was pregnant with our first kid. And you go to the Lamaze classes, and they're all about, you got to breathe. And then they're about, hey, when you guys go into the delivery room, there should be a song that you could bring in and play, and there should be a some sort of a mantra, right? So I was all in on this, my first kid, right? I go into the delivery room, and I look at my wife, and she's got eyes as big as fried eggs. I didn't even recognize her. And I started in on the mantra, and she's like, shut up, hold my hand, and just get out of the way. So she probably would have benefited from a little bit more of that breath work than we were able to put in. So
yeah, Lamaze is there for a reason. And as I'm speaking, I'm thinking like, this is all serious shit stuff or whatever it may be. It's not, you know, it's fun. It just creates a higher level of vibration. That's all. So I may be talking like, oh, this is so serious. Spirituality has to be serious. It's the opposite. It should be enjoyable. It should be, you know, relaxed. But discipline will take you to the next level. Discipline with anything you do.
Well, and it's probably the disciplines required to get you to the point that you can then relax and really enjoy it. So I talking about your world travels, and you've been to some fascinating places, and I'm sure you didn't do what I typically did on a business trip, which is you saw the inside of the airport and the inside of your hotel, and that was it. I think you dug deep. Is there any truth to the rumor that before you joined LaxRatz, that Mark Haddad was spelunking in India and found you hanging from the top of a cave chanting? Is there any truth to that?
I can't confirm nor deny that happened, but it was Haddad, who, rest in peace, a dear friend of all of ours. He, you know, was smart enough to move to Costa Rica, and I ended up going to visit him a bunch. And then I ended up taking 20 kids there to do community service, kind of like Lacrosse the Nations, but just in a different form. So while he didn't find me hanging from a tree or chanting, he did understand what it meant to live a good life. And he went out to Costa Rica, and he was still so involved in lacrosse, and just looked, how can I give back? Not how can I get, the guy never asked for anything. How can I give back? And so he gave us all this LaxRatz that we carry on in his name. So keep watching, keep supporting LaxRatz, and stepping away from it. Also, it's like, I miss it so much. I can't wait to come back when the time is right.
Yeah. Well, you know, you and I were both talking about how wonderful it was to get out to games 2 years ago. Just the love that people were showing us. I was like, man, I could get spoiled by this really quick, but they were all just, and that's the lacrosse community right there, Chief. I mean, you know, I've been involved with other sports, so have you, but I've never seen a sport where the community, the coaches, the players, the parents, the officials, they're all comrades. They're not in it for the money. They're not in it for the glory. They're just in it for the sport. And so thankful that that I found my way here, and I'm sure you are too.
Yeah, it's how we found each other. I mean, lacrosse is the medicine game. And we've seen with COVID, like, we haven't had our medicine. Kids are getting anxious. Kids are getting, you know, wanting to put their energy somewhere. Lacrosse brings us all together. And in Japan, they always break off with lacrosse makes friends. And it absolutely has. And I can't wait to reconnect in the lacrosse world. And I appreciate you having me on to get this ball rolling.
Well, Chief, an incredible pedigree for you, and a very unusual one and a very interesting one. A lot of people in Southern California are wondering what's next. Are you coming back to coach lacrosse? You know, what's out there for you? What are you looking at next?
Right. I'll be back in lacrosse. It's like, it's something you can't take out of the person. Once you start playing or coaching it, and it becomes your community. So I'll be back. I mean, it feels like forever. It's only been a year that I've been away, and I'm trying to, again, stay disciplined to my commitment of, I'm going to give it a year off. So I've been itching to come back, but I'm going to really see it through, get uncomfortable for another 4 months. And then I'll be back on a sideline, whether in LA or in San Diego or who knows, Colorado, somewhere.
Well, those all sound like great destinations. So, hey man, I want to thank you for joining us. It's been a total trip. Like you were saying offline, we could probably talk for days, but I don't think people would want to listen for that long. I want to thank LaxRatz.net. They are our sponsor. Lisa's our producer. She does an incredible job. And I want to thank all the viewers, both in Southern California and around the country for tuning in. Hopefully you guys will come back. So this is Chopper for the Chief saying thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Chopper and the Chief, I love it. Peace.